Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical Light, an independent Masonic show focused on the historical events and aspects within Freemasonry. As always, I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers. I want to thank you all for joining us once more, and I'll kick it over to our co-host this evening, Brother Robert Marshall.
Greetings, everybody. This is Robert Marshall, Secretary and Past Master of Waco Lodge 92, primary sidekick for Alex with Kansas Lodge Research. I'm a member of the Austin Scottish Rite Valley. I don't know what other Masonic affiliations I have. There's too many. And I'm an actual historian, degreed historian. Went to Baylor and studied how to do this. So here I am.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us again. And I guess I left all my stuff out. Past Master Gardener, Lodge number 65, DDGM for 9A, and Director for Kansas Lodge Research. And we have with us our special guest for this evening. Very excited to have Brother Rob Moore with us. Brother Rob, if you don't mind, I'll kick it over to you, let you further introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, brother. My name is Rob Moore. I reside in Royal Oak, Michigan. I am currently the Executive Director of the Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Archive, and Research Center. We reside within the Detroit Masonic Temple, which is the largest Masonic building in the world. I'm also a past master and current secretary of the Michigan Lodge of Research. Currently, as far as lodge affiliations, I'm actually a member of 5 lodges. Officer in 3 of them currently. Yeah, I've got a lot of time on my hands. I'm currently Senior Warden of Zion Lodge number 1, which was originally chartered in 1764. Oldest Masonic body in Michigan. Current Secretary of Detroit Lodge number 2. And I'm the senior deacon of Myrtle Lodge number 89 in Belleville, Michigan. So wear a few different hats. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. This is actually an episode I've wanted to do for quite a while, just time of trying to make everything happen. But when I first got into Historical Light and was kind of getting the page and the group and all that stuff going, one of the first really cool pictures I found was of the Masonic Temple you work at there, and it just blew me away. It's an amazing building. So really excited to hear about some of the history behind there. But before we get into all that, let's kind of kick it off like we always do and ask you a couple questions. First of all being, do you have any family history within Freemasonry, or is it just you?
My great-grandfather was a Mason. He passed away when I was 11 years old. I never really got an opportunity to really talk to him about that. I saw some Masonic memorabilia at his house, the square and compasses, like his life membership certificate, things like that. I asked him about it, and he said, well, it's something that should be taken very seriously. I mean, he's from the generation, that you didn't really talk about it a whole lot, especially, with non-Masons, even family. So he's like, when you're old enough to appreciate that, I'll get into a nice, detailed conversation with you about that. It just never happened, unfortunately. But my grandfather was a member of the local lodge as well. It was more of a social thing for him. He kept up his membership, but he didn't really actively participate. That was about the extent of my family involvement in Freemasonry. So, I had, like I said, relatives that were members, but it kind of depended on different levels of participation. So.
Sure. So were you aware of their Masonic affiliation before getting into Masonry then?
Yeah, I was a little bit. Yeah. So like I said, I saw some of the memorabilia at my great-grandfather's house. My grandfather could kind of mention it in passing here and there. So, I was aware of it. So.
Okay. So would you say, is that something that really made you want to join Masonry, or what was it that actually brought you to the point of making the leap to actually join?
Well, I kind of came to it on my own. It was something that I had always been interested in. When I was younger, I would kind of research the history of certain fraternal societies. I had an interest in Rosicrucianism and whatnot when I was younger, and so that kind of parlayed into at least kind of what I hope to develop, kind of like a cursory understanding of Freemasonry at that time. And then turns out when I got a little bit older, when I was in my mid-20s, a friend of mine who I didn't realize was a Mason until he actually brought it up and we actually got to talking about it. I had some questions for him, and he was honest. He kind of told me what Freemasonry was and what it wasn't, and what I could expect to get out of it if I joined. What I would have to do with a certain mindset I would have to kind of put myself in. So he brought me around and introduced me to a group of brothers. Same thing. I had questions for them. They had questions for me, and actually, then after that, my first really big exposure to it was actually like a tour of the Detroit Masonic Temple. Like I said, it is the largest in the world. I kind of get used to rattling off the statistics, but I mean, if you're not used to hearing the statistics, it's kind of mind blowing. It's 210 feet tall, 550,000 square feet, 1,037 rooms. So
Wow.
I've been in all of them, but yeah, it's mind blowing. And the first time I saw it, I mean, I was just dumbfounded. I was just awestruck that, I mean, like a building like this could just even be built, let alone be actively used by the same organization that built it, that was
Sure.
intended for. So, I mean, the first tour, I also give tours of the building. I mean, one of my responsibilities there is to coordinate tours, to schedule them, and to confer them. And the docent prior to me, his tours got a little bit lengthy sometimes. Our average tour is about typically between like 90 and about 2.5 hours. His tours tended to be a lot longer. The first tour went about 7 hours, but
Wow.
yeah, but I was never bored. I was amazed. So that
Sure.
we don't really do that anymore. But no, at the time it's like wow. So I mean, then I got to talking to him, and I got to talking to a few other brothers from some of the lodges there, and I was hooked. This is something that I wanted to do, and I petitioned after a while, and I was initiated, passed, and raised, and that was back in 2007. And years later, here I am, and the fraternity has taken on a really central role in my life. I work there professionally. I wear a few hats there. I serve in various capacities of it. So it's been a really changing process in my life. So.
Right. That's beautiful. Totally getting cat tongue tied here, sitting here watching the actual panoramic views on the website, and it's totally throwing me off because that place is just amazing. But what I was going to say is your first part of the answer there is that you actually came to it yourself. That's beautiful. There's so many reasons, rhymes and reasons of why people actually get into the fraternity. And I feel, there's quite a bit of it, especially, the generation previous to us, that it was more connection or like, a thing to do because of the history there. And, a lot of times it takes through time before you find that personal connection of yours. So to hear that you kind of came to that from the get-go, that's beautiful, because that starts your journey from the very beginning versus trying to find yourself in it, which for some can just, really take some time. But one thing I want to touch on is the fact that you do work there professionally, which is amazing. I'm totally jealous of that. I would love to explore that building every day. Is that something you got into professionally before joining the craft or after?
It was after, actually.
Sure.
And I was never really focused on like library science or anything like that. Really, before I got into this, in a previous life, I was actually working construction at one point.
Oh, right on.
So yeah, that ended. So I actually went to school for public administration. I mean, at one point I was going to go into some sort of a government work or something like that, and that didn't take place. But once, like I said, once I got down there, once I started, kind of going through the archives, once I started researching, it started with, researching the history of my mother lodge. Like I said earlier, we were originally chartered in 1764.
Right.
So I obviously wanted to go back and learn a bit more about that history, learn the ways and whys about, how the lodge formed and how it developed over time. Then after that, I just started delving into the Masonic encyclopedias. I went through all the Mackey sets and whatnot. I went through like history of concordant orders, which is kind of ubiquitous. But when you're reading it for the first time, it's like, wow. It's like just reading all the other ones, going in and just reading, Preston and, Webb, looking at the original Webb monitors, looking at
Right.
some of the Masonic scholars. I mean, I just had this like wealth of knowledge at my fingertips, and it just kind of really made me want to like really get in and delve into some of the deeper details and just kind of develop just like a holistic understanding and just, learn as much as I could about this. So.
Very awesome. Well, we have you on here tonight. We're so thankful that you joined us this evening, but we're going to have you talk a little bit about the history of Masonry in that jurisdiction and kind of where the archives for your jurisdiction are, what efforts you're currently taking, and just kind of the general history behind. And then we'll jump in with some questions throughout. Robert, you got anything for him before we let him go?
Sure, but it might be tied in with where that's getting started anyway.
Sure.
Brother Moore, you mentioned how you had developed an interest in the 1764 advent of Masonry in Michigan. It was a military lodge or something along those lines, right?
That's correct. Yeah, originally it was, well, what it was, back when Detroit was Fort Detroit, back in 1764, this was not long after the French Indian War. Montreal had fallen to the British in 1760, so the French could no longer supply Fort Detroit. There was a kind of a bloodless handover of power from the French to the British. It just so happened that the last French commandant of Fort Detroit and Major Robert Rogers of Robert's Rangers were both Masons. So they were able to kind of, I don't want to say that played a role in it, but I kind of like to think that that played a role in it. So, so the British took over. The regiment, the British regiment that occupied it was the Royal American Rifles, or the 60th American Regiment of Foot. Most of the British Army officers were members of lodges in Montreal, if not England proper. The area at that time was largely wilderness. The closest settlement at that time would have been Kingston, Ontario, and then further up the Great Lakes would have been like what's modern day like Erie, Pennsylvania. Then upstate New York, Albany and whatnot, Montreal. So obviously going back to their home lodge really wasn't an option. So yeah, at that time it was originally, when it was first formed in 1764, yeah, it was originally a military lodge.
Very cool.
Then
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, all right, well, we'll just have you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the general history of the building and the jurisdiction.
Well, Michigan Masonry has a pretty interesting history. I just mentioned like the early genesis of Zion Lodge. Originally, like Michigan Masonry and Zion Lodge #1 were pretty much one and the same. I mean, Zion Lodge from its inception until about 1821 was pretty much the only game in town. 1821, Detroit Lodge #2 formed out of Zion Lodge #1. And going back to Zion Lodge, it's been under 5 separate charters.
Really?
1764 to 1767 is when it was warranted under the Provincial Grand Lodge of New York, because almost all of its members were British Army officers of the Royal American Regiment of Foot. The unit was transferred out. I can't quite remember off the top of my head where. It was somewhere in the Caribbean. So the lodge kind of went dormant for a period of time. Then in 1794, it started back up again. So there was quite a bit of a gap. There were also like some Irish military lodges operating in the city of Detroit at that time. Same thing happened with them. They got transferred to other garrisons and whatnot. And 1794, it started up again. And this time it was under the Grand Lodge of Upper Canada for a little bit. Then 1806, it transferred allegiance back to the Grand Lodge of New York. So we've been under New York twice. And then 1826 is when the first Grand Lodge of Michigan was formed. And that was started in Detroit. The building is long gone, but there's a statue of George Washington as a master mason. Located not far from it on the Detroit River, which in a way kind of marks where Michigan Masonry, the masonry that we operate under currently started at that time. And that wasn't around for very long. Michigan at that time was getting a lot of influx of settlers from upstate New York, specifically the Burned Over district, where it was just an absolute hotbed of anti-masonry. So a lot of those settlers brought their anti-Masonic prejudices with them. So it wasn't long before what was happening with the Morgan affair in upstate New York was beginning to dramatically affect Michigan as well. Same thing as was the case in New York, was same here. I mean, just Masonry was vilified. I mean, brothers really, I mean, like they lost jobs, they lost families. I mean, they could be physically attacked. I mean, if they were identified as being a Mason. So what happened was just 3 years after it was founded in 1829, the Grand Master at the time, Lewis Cass, and basically what was a secret meeting. We haven't been able to find any official records anywhere on it. Hopefully they're out there somewhere. They'd be very interesting to read. But basically set Michigan Masonry in dormancy for a time. It wasn't like an official, this is done forever. It's like, you know, until things settle down for the safety of everyone involved, we're just going to like shut things down for a little bit. And it wasn't until 1845 that it was officially started up again. There was a brief period in 1840 where they basically tried to resurrect that original Grand Lodge, but they were well intended, but they didn't quite go about it the right way. They didn't get the proper recognition from other jurisdictions. They were actually denied. Michigan was actually denied admittance to the Baltimore Convention in 1843. Yeah. They said flat out, like, no, we're sorry, but you didn't go about this the right way, so we can't recognize you in your current. Well, we can't grant you admission. So it wasn't until 1845 that things got straightened out, and that's the currently operating Grand Lodge of Michigan from 1845 until the present day. So there's been some twists and turns within the fraternity in Michigan. It's not been without its challenges, but we're still here. We're still going, obviously. Now, a little bit about the Detroit Masonic Temple. Detroit, it was back in the 1890s, really is when Michigan Masonry, Detroit Masonry at the time, really felt that they needed like a very large building. There was a Masonic Temple prior to that that was finished in 1895. That was planned to have use for about 50 years, but Freemasonry Detroit was growing so fast, they actually ran out of room in 12 years.
If you'll pause 1 second, Alex, I don't know what I need to do to show this, but I've got a picture of the 1890s building he's talking about so that we could show it right here.
Well, at the bottom of your screen, you should have a share button.
Well, that would be the button I would want to use, huh? Let's see. Go ahead. You can continue, Rob. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to go ahead and get this on there.
No, not a problem. So yeah, that building, it was a nice building. They actually finished that in 1895. And again, it was planned for use for 50 years, but the craft was growing so fast in Detroit at that time. There we go. Yeah. And we have a few artifacts from that building in our temple, our archives. We have the original cornerstone in the lobby right outside the door of the library. That was laid in January of 1894, finished 1 year later. We have a few of the original implements from that building, various things a lodge would use, like aprons, trowels and whatnot. We have some original programs from the dedication. We have various correspondence, various forms of ephemera and whatnot. So finally, it was in 1916 when they said, guys, look, this just isn't working anymore. I mean, they were literally packed in. I mean, they were having lodge meetings in dining rooms. I mean, they had to rent adjacent space right next door because we can't keep doing this. So They made that decision in 1916 to build a bigger building. In 1919, they settled on the space where the temple currently sits. So they started buying up the land, and it wasn't until November 1920 that they could actually finally break ground. It's when they bought up all the property on that, they demolished everything. So it was Thanksgiving Day, November 25th, 1920 is when the groundbreaking took place. And there were thousands of Masons in Cass Park right across the street. The exact number escapes me, but I want to say it was at least around 50,000 just watching this groundbreaking from it. Then finally, in September 18th, 1922 is when the cornerstone was laid for the building. And they went with that date because it was in 1793 that the cornerstone for the U.S. Capitol building was laid by George Washington. In fact, Alexandria Washington Lodge, number 22 in Alexandria, Virginia, lent some of those same artifacts that Washington used. The trowel, Washington's apron was there. So they laid the cornerstone, and there's an interesting thing that happened. Warren Harding was president at the time. He was a Mason. He was supposed to have participated in that ceremony. In fact, if you go back and look at the old programs, it said, now remarks from Brother President Harding. It didn't happen. The First Lady got sick. He had to stay there in Washington with her. So he sent the Secretary of the Navy in his place, a man by the name of Edwin Denby. Denby was a native Detroiter. He was a brother. He was pretty well known in Detroit at that time. He was famous for, during World War I, he would lead these recruitment drives. In fact, there's a park in Detroit. It's really easy to overlook, but there's a small little stone slab in a park that said, on this spot, Edwin Denby joined the U.S. Marine Corps. You know, it goes into a little bit. He later got caught up in the Teapot Dome scandal, and his reputation got ruined. But at the time, he was still well known and well respected. So he took Warren Harding's place. And then finally, Thanksgiving Day, 1926, the building was officially dedicated. So start to finish, it was approximate 6-year construction.
Wow.
So it was. It originally was not the largest in the world. Chicago had that distinction until 1939. When that building was demolished. And then after that point, Detroit became the largest in the world. So it's, we don't quite, at the time, Detroit had a very large Masonic membership. At the time, at our peak, in the late 1950s, we had 50 active Masonic bodies meeting in there at that time. There were 35 lodges and various, I mean, you had the Scottish Rite, you had the Shrine, you had various York Rite groups, York Rite bodies. In fact, the York Rite Sovereign College was started in the Detroit Masonic Temple back in 1957. Just, it's kind of cool. We have a local body
Do you
started
happen to know what the membership count was back in that time?
1950s, I think, you know, I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but we had, I want to say locally, we had about 65,000 members in the city of Detroit alone. Wow. At that time. We've got about 28,000 in the entire state of Michigan currently. So just to give you kind of like a little bit of perspective at that time, but just like most of the rest of the country, there were 2 big waves of membership. Like right after World War I, going in until about the mid to late 20s, when you had a lot of lodges popping up. And then same thing about right after World War II. Late 1940s, early 1950s is when membership started to take off, and you kind of saw the same thing again. You saw a lot of lodges forming. You had a lot of affinity lodges too, a lot of niche lodges. In fact, it's interesting too, because outside the lodge rooms in our building, you'll see the regalia cabinets. I mean, some of them are still used, some aren't, but you have all the original names of the lodges that were once there. Even though many, if not most of those lodges have since consolidated into other lodges, or they've moved out of the building, or they just turned in their charters years ago just for historical purposes, those names are still there. And you'll see names like Schiller Lodge, which was a lodge made up primarily of German-American men. You'll see Mosaic Lodge, which had a predominantly Jewish membership. You'll see Army-Navy, which was at its time primarily consisting of World War I veterans. So you get a lot of that at that time. So and it's then after, and then again in the late 40s, early 50s, you kind of saw that happening again. Only this time it was not so much within the city of Detroit. You saw a lot of like the suburban lodges popping up as well. So it's so 2 big peaks. Then it was kind of a microcosm of what was going on in the city of Detroit throughout the years. You kind of saw people moving out to the suburbs beginning in like the mid 1950s. You know, the lodges would move with them. Then you had a period of just kind of an overall decline within the city of Detroit itself. the neighborhood like started going south a little bit. I mean, people like were kind of, I want to say afraid to come there, but they kind of felt uncomfortable going down there. So, I mean, there was some issues with that as far as that goes. I think too, I mean, and the neighborhood around the temple itself is, I don't want to say it's struggling. It was for a while. It's actually come along quite well, but I mean, you'll still see some blighted buildings and whatnot around the building. I mean, we kind of wish it looked better, but unfortunately we don't own most of the property around the temple itself. I mean, people think we do, and every once in a while we'll get these like, angry phone calls or these misguided emails. Well, why don't you Masons fix up these properties? What are you doing? And it's like, well, we'd love to, but it's kind of out of our hands. So yeah, but us Masons, we control everything. But
That's
but,
right.
yeah.
But do you know how many meetings that would take to be able to fix up those properties?
Yeah. So currently within our building, we have a total of 10 active Masonic bodies. We've got 6 lodges. We've got 1 chapter, Royal Arch. We've got 1 Royal and Select Masons Council, 1 commandery, 1 York Rite College. That's another interesting thing too, like on tours, like it often amazes people, particularly brothers, that this is still an active Masonic building. I mean, we don't have as many bodies as we once did, and realistically, we're probably never going to see those kind of numbers again. But yeah, I mean, we're still here. I mean, it was a building built by Masons, for Masons, continues to be an active part within the fraternity. So it's a legacy we try to keep going.
That's awesome. So I'm sitting here glancing through all the different rooms and theaters and chapels and everything you guys have featured on your website, which are all just insanely beautiful. I'm slipping. How many total rooms did you say is in the facility again?
1,037.
Good Lord. I guess just top of my head, how much of the building actually gets used? You say you got 10 active lodges. Do they all use separate parts of the building, or?
Yeah. What it is, the building is roughly divided into 3 main parts.
Okay.
There's the ritual tower, which is the most easily identifiable part of the building. It contains the lodge rooms. It contains the main lobby. It contains the mezzanines in between the floors themselves. Most of the mezzanines aren't too exciting. It's typically offices or storage space. The one exception is our 3rd floor mezzanine. We have what we call the drill hall. That was originally intended for commandery marching practice. This is the time when you would have hundreds of members coming to commandery. So they needed like a big space to march. So they built a 17,500 square foot floating floor. So the floor has, it was the first of its kind in North America. You had a series of layers of like foam and soft pine to kind of cushion the back and the joints. And we've got some old photographs of like, I mean, you literally had like battalions practicing in there. It was I imagine like at that time that would have been quite a sight to see. But most of it's just like offices and storage space and whatnot. The middle part of the building is contains the main theater. We have 2 theaters in our building. The main theater seats 4,404. The smaller of our 2 theaters, which was originally known as the Scottish Rite Cathedral, which is currently called the Jack White Theater, that seats 1,567. So that, and above that is the drill hall I was just mentioning. Then the eastern part of the building is the Shrine Tower. That was not an original part of the building. Originally, it was meant to be a 6-story building rather than a 7-story building, and there would not have been in that east tower. So if you look at an external composite of the building, it would have been, it was meant to look like a gavel. The head of the building would have been like the head of the gavel. The rest of it would have been like a tail. But at one point in the about 1919, 1920, the local shrine wanted to be a part of it too. So they bought an additional 150 feet of space on what was called Bag Street at the time. And then in October 1920, it got renamed Temple Avenue. Imagine that. So then they became a part of it too. So those are the 3 main parts of it. I would say, as far as overall use of the building, percentage-wise, about 65%, I would say, gets used on a regular basis. Obviously, some rooms
Nice.
more than others. We do have a fair amount of underused space. We've got some mezzanines and some floors above, like the 5th floor, because the way it's situated. The 5th floor of the building, we've got 3 lodge rooms. The 4th floor of the building, we've got 2 lodge rooms. The 3rd floor, we've got a lodge room, and we've got a very special room that was specifically purpose-built for commandery. Then on the 2nd floor, we've got 2 rooms that originally were meant to be strictly for the York Rite. We've got a small room that's kind of looks almost like a crypt or a vault that was designed for the council. And then we've got a room that was designed specifically for the Royal Arch chapter. Then the Scottish Rite was originally on the 6th floor, and the shrine had the entire eastern tower to themselves. The local Scottish Rite moved out in 2006 when there was a little bit of uncertainty about the long-term viability of the building. The shrine moved out 2 years before that, so that kind of added to a little bit of the unused space, but we've kind of adapted. We've pretty much had to. So a lot of the underutilized space has been rented out. For instance, we have a law firm that takes up some space on the 2nd floor mezzanine. In the past, on the 6th floor, we've had like a recording studio. We still have bands that come in intermittently and do some practice space and recording up
Nice.
there. So we do have a little bit of that. A lot of what we do is driven as far as revenue goes, a lot of it comes from concerts. AEG Entertainment back in March signed a 10-year deal to take over the management, not ownership, management of our 2 theaters. We often have to emphasize that because sometimes we'll still get calls, oh, the Masons sold the building. No, we did not. So yeah, that's a lot of it too, is correcting a lot of the misinformation. So, and then they've done a great job. They brought in some great concerts. They've already put well over $1 million into renovating both theaters, fixing up the stages, the lighting, a lot of the HVAC, which is stuff that has to be done. But I mean, just to be frank, that we just ourselves just didn't have the money to do. So that's getting done. We're very good as far as special events, weddings. The aforementioned commandery space on the 3rd floor was deliberately designed to look like a chapel or a cathedral. So it's a very popular wedding space. We're in the top 10 list in the entire state of Michigan for wedding destinations. Corporate events, we do quite well. Forbes magazine is doing its annual 30 under 30 event within our building. That's pretty much taken over everything. Prior to that, we had Theater Bazaar, which is a kind of like a masquerade party of sorts. It's really interesting to see because they have a lot of the rooms, a lot of the kind of look like these elaborate sets. It's kind of like I hesitate to use the word adult theme, but kind of like a fun house of sorts. So it's very interesting. It's very unique. So we've, out of necessity, we've had to adapt a little bit. So I mean, if the building were just fraternal use and absolutely nothing else, we would have closed years ago. I mean,
Sure.
So we had to adjust. We had to do a few things to kind of keep us viable, so to speak. But it hasn't been without its challenges. But the end result is that we're still going strong. So.
I think that's awesome though, especially with that kind of space. I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer to rent that out, but it's great that you've got some good guys in there to help kind of ease the costs and stuff like that and keep up that space. But I love to see that because, as we've talked about before, these buildings were meant to be kind of a cornerstone in the community. And by not having it strictly fraternal, but, having the opportunity for a business to get in there and them have their clients come in and stuff like that, it gives more of an opportunity for the public to see and, respect the beauty of these buildings and what they once were and what they still are in your guys' case. I mean, looking at the pictures on the site here and, everyone watching this episode, I strongly encourage you, go to the website, check it out because they've got some fantastic panoramic view images on here. It's just a beautiful building. I definitely have to come check it out now. I'm really intrigued to see it in person. But I want to get to the nitty gritty of what I'm totally into because I'm jealous of your job. Once again, you're the executive director of the Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Archive, and Research Center. Love that.
Yes.
So with in the prime, we were talking about, 65,000 people in the city of Detroit alone. Throughout all the years, I mean, thinking about the Masons that trace their lineage back to this Grand Lodge, how big is your guys' archives, and where are you at with those?
Well, we currently take up the western half of the fourth floor of the building. So we've got about 1,800 square feet total. We also have a lodge room located within our facility, the Egyptian lodge room. What happened back in, I think it was like 2008, 2009, the Grand Lodge of Michigan basically kind of made a deal with the temple, because obviously it's a special case. You got to have the room spread it out a bit more than say like a standard one-room temple. So rather than having to go and get a dispensation each and every time, they basically undedicated the lodge rooms with one exception. The lodge room, the Egyptian lodge room located within the library, just is strictly Masonic purposes. And every once in a while, if it's a very rare special occasion, we can bend that a little bit, but predominantly it's just for Masonic purposes. The library itself has actually been around since 1882. Wow. So we predate not only the current building, but also the building prior to this building. It moved around a few times. It was originally kind of set up almost like a Masonic Temple Association. It was made up of representatives from each one of the 11 Masonic bodies in the city of Detroit at that time. So, there's like 2 reps per body. And each one kind of agreed to kind of donate things towards this library. So it's interesting. If you look at some of the original book plates, it's like, the history of one of the Mackey encyclopedias or whatever, like it's donated by Detroit Lodge number 2. Whatnot. And that was kind of, each lodge was kind of trying to outdo each other to, what they could donate towards this, because, they want to say, hey, we contributed the most towards this. So it's a little bit of a friendly rivalry, a little bit of a competition. We have gone through a few different forms. There's been a few inventive ideas. There was one briefly in the 70s, and it kind of changed forms a little bit. It kind of moved around the temple. Sometimes it had more space at one point. Sometimes they kind of stuffed it into one of the smaller rooms, and some of the books got put in storage. In the late 70s up until about the mid 90s, it was known as the Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Museum, and Hall of Fame. The idea is that it was it was well intended. It was kind of made up to be kind of like a buy-in type program. Like if you donated like X amount of money, you became a member of the Hall of Fame. And that was actually patterned after the Masonic Temple Honor Guard. And kind of jumping back to some of the Masonic Temple history, the temple debt was not officially retired until 1953. As of 1950, there was still, at that time, 1950s dollars, $2 million of debt on the building. So they came up with the Temple Honor Guard. If you donated $1,000 towards that, you became a member of the Honor Guard. You got your name on the wall, and you got a plaque, you got a nice dinner. So it was kind of patterned on that. So again, it's gone through various forms. In 2016, we officially changed the name to the Library, Archive, and Research Center to kind of better reflect our mission. We're not really a museum in the strictest sense. We do have some exhibits, but we're not a place where you can just kind of like wander in whenever you want, check things out. We're kind of more of like a research type library. If somebody's looking specifically for some sort of Masonic history, or sometimes like we'll help folks out with some genealogy and whatnot. So we're there. So we've got a wide variety. We've got about, in fact, we're in the middle of doing some inventory right now. We've got about 5,000 print materials of various sorts. Some of them are standard books. Some of them are, various magazines, journals, and whatnot. We've kind of, this is the other thing too. We kind of had to focus more of our collection in terms of space, because we were literally running out of space for a while. Focus some of our material archives, like on Southeast Michigan Masonry alone. And one of the great things is that we have an outstanding relationship with the official Grand Lodge Library. That's the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library in Grand Rapids. Dirk Hughes, an amazing man and Mason, runs that. So it's on the other side of the state, but it's not a ridiculous drive. So we see each other quite often. We have a great collaborative partnership. Sometimes if they want to build up a collection, we'll give them some stuff, and kind of vice versa. And obviously this is stuff, just because, again, we've only got so much space, but you don't want to get rid of it. So I mean, this is like so we kind of put together what we effectively call Dirk boxes. We'll just fill up a box, full of stuff that, say like it's better suited that, it stays there right now. And this is something we're working on too. We're working on kind of an archive annex. We'll be able to kind of like classify things and store things more effectively. They already have that in place right now. So that's, so it's in safe hands. So we kind of do that. So yeah, it's there's a lot of things we're trying to do with the library right now. There's a little bit of capital improvements we need to do. Unfortunately, the library was kind of more of an afterthought in the building for a while. It kind of became kind of just this collection of stuff rather than kind of like a viable research institution. But we've made great strides within the past 3-4 years to kind of bring it along where it needs to be. So we're fixing up there's, it's a 93-year-old building, so you're going to have some peeling paint here and there. I mean, you're going to have some things that got to be fixed. So we're kind of taking great strides towards that. We're doing a lot of, like I said, I mentioned the inventory. We're doing a lot of digitization, or at least we're trying to. One of our archival duties is to kind of be a keeper of the blueprints, and there's over 6,000 sets.
Wow.
So
you guys still have the blueprints to the building?
We got them.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so we're kind of in the midst of getting those digitized as best we can. That's an ongoing process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So we're getting them stored a bit more effectively. We're trying to get a blueprint cabinet for them. There's one that would work really, really well for us, but it's costing about $8,000. So that's, something we had to prioritize here. So that's something we're doing too. Another thing we really do too is just try to really get us out there in terms of not just a place where people come and do research and whatnot and read, but also a place where they can enjoy fellowship. We want people to be able to encourage. We do a series of events. Something we're kicking off actually right now is a series of Library After Dark events. So over the course of the year, into next year now too, we do a series of events that are kind of more towards kind of more social activities. For instance, in November, we're doing a cigar night. We've got some scrubbers that really clean up the air, so it's really not much of an issue there. Some of the ideas we're kind of having too now is that we'll bring in local speakers, university professors and whatnot to talk about various Masonically themed events. I mean, somebody might talk about geometry, somebody might talk about music, along those lines. We'll also have, we've got a great relationship with the Michigan Lodge of Research. They meet there, right now they're having every meeting there, but they usually have at least a November quarterly meeting there. So the idea is that, brothers that are working on some form of research will kind of have kind of a testing ground to come out and kind of bounce some ideas off each other. So we're doing a lot there. We have also been in the habit of sponsoring various events. The Great Lakes Masonic Convocation, which is entering its 4th year. That's held out in Lansing, right in the middle of the state, where the Michigan has 4 research lodges. So we kind of get together and we put that out there. And the idea now is that we want to expand that. We want to include most, if not all, the jurisdictions in the Great Lakes region and encourage them to kind of get more involved, send speakers, be a part of the planning process. But that's something that we feel greatly in. That's something that we feel strongly is an important part of the fabric within Michigan Masonry, because there's this great outcry, especially among some of the younger brethren and some of the lodges, for a stronger emphasis on Masonic education. And we want to be in a position where we can effectively provide that, or at least encourage the study of that, at least kind of provide like a conduit for that. So we have a lot of things going on right now. But we've got a great group of brothers here that feel strongly in our mission. We've got a great group of brothers that each have their own variety of talents and strengths that they bring to the table. So I'm really pleasantly encouraged by what we've been able to do, and I'm really excited about our future prospects.
That's fantastic. Sounds like you guys have a lot going on down there, or I guess up there for me.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great deal and reason for excitement about what all you got going on. And boy, do y'all have layers and layers of history from 1764 to the present day. That's a lot of time to fill. You guys were the first Masonic activity west of the Allegheny Mountains.
Yeah, that's we were so that's one of the oldest. If now there's a little bit of argument there, but
Sure.
we like to think we're some of the oldest west of the Allegheny Mountains there. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting Masonic history, and people don't, when they think like you were saying, multiple layers of Masonic history, like Michigan doesn't immediately spring to mind, but we've got a really interesting history here. So
I know I spotted Lewis Cass first, or one of the first Grand Masters, who was also one of the first Grand Masters in Ohio, served in 2 or 3 different presidential cabinets, arguably one of the most influential Masons of the 1800s in America. And then in the 1900s, holy cow, the musical lineups. Rolling Stones, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, AC/DC, and it just goes on and on and on. I found a album cover I'm about to shoot over, and this thing is so cool. If there's any music fans out there, the Detroit Masonic Hall is about as good as it gets. It ought to be a music mecca if it's not already treated like one. Let's see here. And of course, you've got the story in recent years of Jack White stepping forward and donating a bunch of money to the Masonic Temple because his mom had a job there when he was a kid. I mean, it's just incredible. So here is the album cover. We've got Detroit, the Rolling Stones in the 1970s, and you see their vertical text going up the left side, Masonic Hall 1978. Man, that's awesome. If you're an old rock fan, it doesn't get any cooler than that. And then I was even more surprised to run across this. Is this showing the news article of the Daytona 500 right now?
I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. There we go. Can you see that one?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, so there's the Daytona 500 in the Detroit Masonic Auditorium. I mean, how cool is that?
Fumes for everybody.
And if I wasn't showing the, there it is. Let's see. I have got to get better at using this thing. Share, and we'll do right there. There's the Rolling Stones cover. And the cool thing is that their album from that year is actually live recorded in the Detroit Masonic Hall. So you can actually go listen to the Rolling Stones playing in Detroit from back in the day. Wow. It's just, you guys have such an amazing resource there. And usually across the country, you have cases where a phenomenal building is either still being used Masonically, or the Masons had to let it go and it now has a really cool use, whether it be music or community. You guys have actually managed to do both over the last 100 years, and that is really hard to continue to do if you look around the country.
Yeah, and it hasn't been without its challenges. There were some points back in the mid 2000s when there were some serious concerns that the building was going to leave the hands of the fraternity. So that was a time, like I said, of relative uncertainty. But we had a good group of brothers step up who said, no, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions. We're going to have to do a few things that in the past that we probably would not have done in terms of events and things like that. But that did take place. And you mentioned Jack White. He stepped up in big time, helped us out in our time of need, and he didn't have to do it. He actually he showed up one day at the reception desk and said, look, I understand that you guys are going through a little bit of financial issues. I'm in a position to help. You helped out my family in our time of need, and I can do the same for you if you'd like. And his business manager, from what I understand, actually tried to talk him out of it and said, like, you don't have to do this. But we told him, like, and we said, you don't have to do this. But it's like, I'd like to. So, and he didn't ask. In fact, it was kept anonymous for a while, but that wasn't going to stay anonymous for long. I mean, like, an intrepid reporter can just file a FOIA request, and it's going to find out eventually. So it was revealed that it was Jack White that did it. So, and he didn't ask for it, but there were a couple things renamed in his honor. Like I said, like the Scottish Rite had left the building prior to that, so the Scottish Rite areas, the theater, the lobby got renamed, Jack White Theater, Jack White Lobby.
Nice.
Prior to that, what had happened, I mean, the reason why the building was kind of in the issue it did was because, like I said, we kind of had to do a few things differently. There was an operational agreement with a building operator that didn't quite work out, and we got left holding the bag on a few things that we had to deal with, and then the county at the time also shortened the amount of time that you could float back taxes from 5 years to 2. So it was kind of it was a double whammy at a really bad time. So we wouldn't have been okay financially. I mean, it would have taken a little bit longer, but we had a plan to get out of it. But I mean, and that donation came through at an opportune time. So again, like a very large building in the middle of a city that's had a fair amount of struggles over the years, that sometimes doesn't have the greatest of reputations, sometimes deservedly, but usually non-deservedly. So that's the perception too. So again, it's been a tough set of circumstances over the years,
Sure.
but yeah, we're still here. We're still going strong. We feel is a very proud legacy. We feel that we have a sacred trust to the fraternity. There are many Masonic temples, but there are very few Masonic monuments, and we feel very much that this is a monument. We feel this is something that, for the sake of the fraternity, that this is something that has to be kept going. This is something that has to be kept viable, strong. So that's the charge that we feel that we have to keep.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you, man. It is a staple facility, and I mean, everything in Masonry continues to have its ups and downs, but you got to roll with them. Do the best we can, and from seeing the work that you guys have done on this building, it's amazing. You can tell that your guys' heart and soul is truly there, and you're doing really great things. And I think from a crafts perspective as a whole, everybody really appreciates that, because like you said, that it is a staple. It is an icon. Pretty much everyone knows about it. And, whether we're directly associated to it or not, as Freemasons, we're all proud of it. So, thank you really sincerely from the bottom of our hearts for doing the work that you guys do there. So I got a quick left field one I'm going to throw at you here. Today in the Historical Light group, shameless plug, if you're not a member, go join. We actually had a Michigan post. This was for a fellow that was out of Troy, Michigan. I know it's not Detroit, but it is close to you guys. So I thought I would just take a swing and see if you guys knew anything about it. So we found a photo of a Johnson Niles out of 1870. He was said to be the father of Troy, Michigan, listed for opening a hotel, being a first postmaster, county justice of peace, so on and so forth. but we were not able to find a Masonic affiliate record for him. We do have a picture of him in his regalia. Do you happen to know anything about this individual, or if he was confirmed?
You know what? I actually I was watching that. I was looking at that thread earlier today on the post, and Worship Brother Matt Shelton, who's actually one of our docents down here at the temple. He
Nice.
theorizes, yeah, he theorizes, and I tend to agree with this, is that he was a member of Oakland Lodge number 3.
Right.
Which wasn't around for too long, and again, it would have roughly coincided with right around the same time of those initial Masonic troubles, when the first Grand Lodge was basically shut down in its infancy. And a lot of those records, some were saved, but some of them weren't. So Oakland Lodge number 3 was one of those lodges that didn't survive. When the
Sure.
second Grand Lodge started up in the mid 1840s, a lot of that didn't carry over. So my theory is that if he wasn't like raised elsewhere and like that record just didn't survive, is that he was a member of that Oakland Lodge number 3, and the records just didn't carry over.
So
Fantastic.
I'm just now looking into this. This was something I missed earlier today, but I do have that he was serving as Grand Marshal in Michigan in the 1890s, and that there's still a historic home that he lived in there in Troy. I'm gonna keep looking, see if I can find anything else.
Awesome. Robert is on the case. Yeah, I totally saw the comments from Brother Shelton there. Figured I'd throw it in. Glad to see that you concur with those findings. So guys, if you weren't in on it, we have some awesome historical conversations within the group. If you're not a member, Historicalite Masonic Research Group, go click join, get in on those conversations. Unlike the plethora of other Masonic groups out there on Facebook, we keep this strictly Masonic history. Any other posts get discarded. So it is all for history nerds like you and I. So join the group, get in on the combos. Brother, thanks for answering that question. The other thing I throw at you while Robert's doing some further research there, I believe it was you guys a while back on Facebook was selling like a ton of books. I know before this, we were talking in the green room there about Grand Lodge of Kansas selling a lot of books out of the last 2 auctions. But tell me a little bit of why you guys were getting rid of so many.
Well, a lot of it were duplicates, and that's still ongoing. We just had so many copies of like I said, the Mackie sets, of the coil sets. We in abundance, and it's just obviously we're going to keep a good deal of them, but some of the stuff too. It's like we thought, hey, why not? You know, just if there's a brother out there who's looking to start or kind of add to his own personal Masonic library, or if there's a lodge that perhaps might want a few sets, we'll sell some at a reasonable price and use the proceeds to kind of help out what we're doing in our own library, like some of the projects we're looking to do in terms of digitization, some of the projects for capital improvements and whatnot, some of our acquisitions that we're looking to get as far as equipment and things like that. So and some of the stuff too is kind of like I said, we're trying to focus and become kind of more of I don't want to say a strictly Masonic library in terms of our content, but kind of more focused on that. And we were talking a bit before the show about the Grand Lodge of Kansas, kind of what they're doing as far as their book sale. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of that is kind of more non-Masonic stuff they're looking to kind of jettison. We're trying to do the same thing. Some of the stuff we have, I mean, it's wonderful stuff, but we kind of came to the conclusion that, if a researcher wanted, I mean, I'll give you one example. We've got a set of 19th century Census Bureau records. We've got like a nice geological survey set that was put out in the 19th century. I mean, it's really nice stuff, and it's like, part of me says, this is really cool. I'd really like to hold on to this, but at the same time, it's like, well, we also want to be like a viable research library that focuses more on Masonic content. So it's like, and that's
right.
And that's a constant thing we kind of deal with. It's like, do you hold on to some of this cool stuff, or maybe do you sell it to kind of get a little bit more money for what we really want to do as far as an institution. And some of the stuff too is just duplicates. I mean, like we've got just another example. We've got about like 30 copies of The Builders. It's a great book. I mean, it's like I personally feel that every Mason should read it. But the same thing too. It's like, do you need 30 copies of The Builders taking up shelf space when like three or four is fine? So, and like I said, you help another brother kind of build up his library with the proceeds, benefiting a good cause. So it's and again, that's it's when we deaccession anything, just like any other research library, like we put a good deal of thought into it. I mean,
Sure.
So that's kind of where we're at with that too.
So do you guys have, is that on your website, or how are you guys basically housing those sales?
Pretty much right now, that's the other thing too. We've got to get that website back up. I mean, we had a couple false starts, but right now, it's done primarily on social media.
Okay.
You can find us on Facebook. We've got a link to that. You can also, we're getting an eBay set up as well. So that the best way to go about it though, if you want to contact us about anything, email right now is our primary best source. The email address for us is DMT docents. That's D as in dog, M as in Mary, T as in toy. Docents, DOCENTS@gmail.com. That's our primary address. It's kind of our ad hoc email right now until we get our website up and running. So that's our best point of contact. If you want to get a copy of our list of books we have for sale, or if you just have like any questions about the building, or if there's anything we can do to help out, that's our primary of getting hold of us as well. So that's so we love answering questions. We love when brothers reach out to us, just to talk or whatever. So that's we're always there.
Well, for the Masonic collector out there, or somebody trying to get started or even added to their collection, opportunities like that are just those are the ones you want to jump on, right? Because so many guys will scroll through eBay. Well, what happens there is people beat you to the punch with deals like this, and then that's why we see those books on eBay for $5,000 to $1 million, just unrealistic. And then guys like me are like, I would really love to read that book, but I'm not paying $1 million for it. So while there's an opportunity like this, man, go check out that Facebook page and see what kind of books they got. I know I'm going to tonight, because there's always usually some good ones you can add to your collection. And to be able to get it directly from a Masonic temple like that, and also help out with the mission that they're trying to do, you can't go wrong with that. That's pretty awesome, man. I hope that venture goes very well for you guys. Robert, you found anything in your research down there?
I've found lots of references to Johnson Niles' Masonic activity in Michigan. He seemed to be pretty involved with funeral services as well as building dedications. But of course, as I said earlier, he was serving as Grand Marshal, so it makes sense that he would have been.
Right.
And there was a Niles Lodge number 4. Is that still in existence, Brother Moore?
To the best of my knowledge, yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, so because there's a lodge with his name and there's a city with his name, there's a lot of stuff popping up when looking for Johnson Niles, but no specific lodge references yet.
Sweet. Well, Brother Marshall, if you don't mind, probably after the show later on, if you can add some of that to the thread there in the group and keep that conversation going. I'm sure some of those guys that we're in on that topic would love to see that updated information.
You got it.
Sweet. Well, man, I really appreciate having you on the show tonight. We've covered some awesome information about the Masonic Temple there in Detroit and the amazing things you guys are doing. I think for now, we'll go ahead and send it over to you for any final thoughts.
Well, brothers, I'm glad I know we had a couple of false starts here, so I'm finally glad we could get together and make this happen. Again, I'd like to thank you as Brother Alex, as well as Brother Robert, for giving me this opportunity. I've been a long time listener and follower of the show, so it's great to finally be a guest here. Yeah, again, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I've had a great time chatting with both of you tonight. Always love talking about our building. Like I said, it's often a labor of love, but it's something
Always.
that I feel strongly about. It's something I'm very much dedicated to. It's something that I really believe in. I love the fraternity. I love the building that we're in. So again, I'd just like to thank you for having me on the show this evening.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you, honestly. And you know, your love for the fraternity definitely shows through, and we're proud to have you on our team, brother. Brother Robert, I'm gonna toss it down to you for final thoughts.
All right. Brother Moore, you've got a pretty iconic photo that I think a lot of Masons around the country recognize when they see. You're a cigar guy, so are you a Hiram and Solomon cigar guy, or do you have a different preferred stick?
Well, you know, I kind of prefer I prefer a good Maduro.
Okay.
I kind of prefer the cigars to be a little bit darker. I like the Hiram and Solomons. They're a little bit tougher to get in Michigan. There's a smoke shop that's a little bit of a healthy drive that carries them. But yeah, the Hiram and Solomons are great. I like the Veiled Prophet from Hiram and Solomon. That's a really good smoke. We got a nice little humidor that we keep going in the library as well. I mentioned we've got the smoke eaters that helps out a lot. A lot of the brothers throughout Michigan really are really into it. You know, it's a really good way to kind of enjoy some conviviality, some fellowship. A lot of the, you know, like I said, a lot of the brothers like to get together, have a smoke, kind of chat about, you know, not just the crap, about things going on in their lives. So, but yeah, it's I try to be more of a social smoker. You know, it's not something I try to do, you know, every day, but it kind of happens that way sometimes. So, but yeah, I've got the Civil War looking photo. I've got a more recent one too that me and a brother back on actually Sunday just went out. Same thing, you know, just got together and just did some chatting and happened to have one of my lodge hats on, so I just turned around and to chat him, got a photo. So
Very cool. Well, thanks for that feedback. I'll put a word in the Hiram and Solomon guys' ears and tell them that their cigars are hard to find up there, so maybe they can start working on making them more available. I've got my Masonic cigar coffin here. That's what I use to carry cigars around when I travel. It was given to me by a brother. I would also like to say before signing out that the Detroit Masonic Temple was one of the first, I don't know how else to describe it, but awe-inspiring Masonic buildings I ever visited not long after I became a Mason. It's one of those rare buildings that I hope every Mason, and a part of me would hope that anyone anywhere interested in architecture in any way whatsoever, Mason or not, would go see one of these types of buildings, because it offers that very unusual, eclectic opportunity to go from room to room and see Egyptian revival, Romanesque, Neo-Gothic, colonial style, just a series of historic schools of architecture. And outside of these increasingly rare Masonic buildings, you're not really able to walk through different schools of architecture in any other place. So if you're ever in the Detroit area and you choose to not go see this building and hang out with Brother Moore here, then shame on you. That's all I could say about it. And that's what I got. Thanks for joining us tonight, Rob.
oh, thank you, brothers. And yeah, like I said, if you're ever in the Detroit area, just drop us a line. We do ask that you give us a little bit of lead time to make sure you know it's a good day for a tour. Make sure that if I'm not available, you know, we got a docent that can take you around. It's a big building. We don't want you to get lost. But yeah, we love showing it off. You know, we love showing it off. We love chatting about it. We love talking about it. So yeah, you know, another shameless plug, but I mean, it really should be on your Masonic bucket list. Just come take the trip.
Sure.
So definitely worth it.
Well, brother, you know, again, I just totally appreciate you having you on the show, if I can speak right tonight. It's great to hear that you're a longtime viewer of Historical Light, so that's even more cool to have you join us. And we hope to have you again in the future, man. This was a plethora of information tonight, some really good stuff. Thrilled to find out more about this temple that I've seen pictures of for so long. I'm not content now. It just makes me want to see it that much more. And, you know, me and Robert, we just had the chance to meet up in Oklahoma not too long ago and did a tour of a Masonic building there. And we've got one or two other trips that we're pondering doing here in the fairly near future. So I don't know, Robert, what do you think, man? I think we may need to fit in a Detroit trip at some point. And,
You know, funny thing, I actually just invested in a, we'll call it a herbal business in Michigan.
Legal here.
What's that?
I was just going to say it's legal here.
Bingo. That's that's why it's located there. But I have an eye towards moving it or a branch of it here when it becomes legal here is the reason I was interested. But anyway, I will be going to Michigan fairly soon to visit that, and hopefully Alex and I can swing over to your temple.
Love to take you around.
Be fantastic. We need one of those 7-hour tours. We want to see everything.
You know, you're going to see a lot. Bring your walking shoes, but no, that's the thing too. And just speaking of the tours, real quick, we do a little bit of variety. We do kind of like the more kind of standard, you know, like stuff that focuses on the history and the architecture of the building. We've also, for about the last 2 years, been doing what we call behind the scenes tours. We show a little bit more of like the variety of the infrastructure of the building itself. You know, some of the stuff, you know, for security liability reasons, stuff we really can't show on regular tours, like the power rooms, like, you know, the service tunnels, you know, things like that. But a lot of folks are interested in that, and it's that's been an excellent fundraiser for the library. That's something we try to do usually on a quarterly basis, if not more. So yeah, but yeah, if you don't mind doing a lot of walking, maybe getting a little dirty, yeah, we can. Yeah.
Dude, that sounds right down our path. That's kind of what we prefer, right, Robert?
That's right. Actually, I was thinking surely for historical light specialists, there's some sort of accidentally get lost in the building and spend the night in one of the 1,000 rooms option.
Yes. We'll put that on the books. It's the historical light tour.
There you go. Just for YouTube.
Well, you know, I should have done this earlier, but I want to send it back over to you if you don't mind, and give you an opportunity to hit up any shameless plugs. I know your facility does weddings and all kinds of other stuff. How can we find out information about that? How can we find out more information about the facility in general? And how can we get a hold of you?
Well, the website is www.themasonic.com. That gives you a great rundown about the building itself. Like you said, you mentioned the 360 tour. If you can't make it to Detroit anytime soon, it's the next best thing. Also, you can call me direct. My number at the temple is 313-832-7100, extension 227. And if I don't pick up right away, just leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said, we're still working on the library Facebook page. I was hoping to have it up and running by now. Not quite yet, but it will be soon. But you can find us on Facebook, Detroit Masonic Temple Library, Archive, and Research Center. We update it pretty much every day. Always try to have some fresh content up there. So that's a great way to kind of check out what we're doing. And if you're so inclined, send us a message. Again, we love chatting with brothers. We love answering questions. So yeah, come check us out sometime.
Awesome. Well, brother, thank you again for coming on the show. We hope to have you on another time if you're willing. We'd always love to have another chat with you. Until next time, everybody, definitely hit up the group. That is the Historical Light Masonic Research Group on Facebook. If you're not a member already, go there now, click join, get in on the conversation. We'll continue it there. We've got some cool little I don't want to say games, but items we're going to do to keep the topics interesting over the coming weeks there. Also, if you like Historical Light, you want to see us grow and continue, we've got some really cool things coming down the pipeline in the future that we're excited about. If you want to help support the show, go to the website, and you can do so safely and securely through PayPal. We appreciate you all. Hit up the group, and we'll talk to you there. Until next time, see y'all later. Thanks, brothers.